We begin the 2022 Regional History Forum with an historical note. While there have been a few programs in the 43-year history of the series that took place outside of the 1859 courthouse building, there have only been 3 years when all the programs happened elsewhere. The first year was 1997, the year after the 1996 flood, when the building was being installed in its new site, the 7th, and we hope final time the courthouse was moved. Last year, while the COVID-19 closures were in effect, was the second year that the entire series went away from the building. This year, with COVID cases spiking in Wasco County, we've once again gone to Zoom presentations. In case you haven't visited, the old courthouse features the sheriff's office and jail, and the upstairs courtroom where we usually meet for Regional History Forum. The building served not only as headquarters for Wasco County, but also the Dalles City Hall. The original courthouse tells the story of our town's early governmental history. It was restored and stays open thanks to the generosity of members and donors. History Forum programs have always been free. In normal years, we would pass a sock around for voluntary contributions. Since we can't do that this year, we invite you to help us continue these programs and to open the doors for another tourist season with your donation to the original Courthouse Preservation Corporation.
Eric Gleason, our president, could not be with us today. There's his smiling face, but he had a family situation come up and had to be out of town this weekend. So I just want to welcome all of you. And again, the courthouse will be open just as soon as the Empress line begins its the tour boat tours, and then the regular Thursday, Friday, Saturday hours a little bit later in the spring and on through the summer. So I want to move on to the program today. Our program, John S. Woodruff, Hermit of the Cave, is a program that was put together by Georga Foster. She is president of the Columbia Gorge Genealogical Society. She also volunteers at the Discovery Center Library, and she says these are retirement activities that took her a long time to have the time, and still has the energy to get involved in all these good things. And this is a program she put together originally for the Genealogical Society, and we're delighted that she's sharing it with all of us today. Georgia, we are yours.
Okay. Thank you so much for inviting me to give this talk. It's been a large mystery to the Dalles for about 125 years. John Woodruff was known as the Hermit, and I think today we're going to learn a little bit more about John, and we may come away with some understanding as to why this man lives such a recluse and singular life. He is one of the most popular subjects on our historical Facebook pages, and there's more questions and speculation about him than probably any other subject that I've seen. I even know some local residents that have expressed their family stories. Their grandmothers or grandfathers knew John Woodruff, and according to them, he was a very nice man, very cordial, very educated. They took him food and took him newspapers. His favorite pastime was reading. So we're going to look a little deeper. We're going to cover his ancestry, his family, and today his son Henry, who has a wild adventure in Sitka, Alaska. And so on we go here. John Woodruff made his home in a cave above the Catholic cemetery. He was said to have carried water from Mill Creek, gleaned his meals from local restaurants and business extras and scrap, which is probably part of the story. I know that many residences took him food and things too. He called his cave his rock castle. It's 100 feet above the bottom of the hill on West 13th Street. It used to be known as B Road years ago, or Chenoweth Road. He admired the view and the fresh air and his perch above the city. He once worked for the Columbia Hotel as a night manager or a night clerk. He also lived there, I believe, at one point. And he worked for the Horn Saloon before retiring to his cave on the hill. Here is another shot, a closer shot of the cave. It is said that he made modifications inside the cave as well. He added doors, of course, to keep out the weather. There looked like there was 2 smokestacks there outside. One looked like a trash burner, and the other one looked like some indoor heating. But if you really look at this picture carefully, he was quite unique in building this up underneath this rock outgrowth here. And so he made himself quite a little residence. This book by Francis E. Woodruff was a Yale graduate in 1864, wrote about the Woodruffs of New Jersey. This book outlines John's ancestry to North America. John's ancestral background began in Kent, England. This line of Woodruffs came to America in 1640, over 100 years or more before the American Revolution. They came by way of Massachusetts, settled in Southampton, Long Island, New York. Several families migrated to Essex and Morris County, New Jersey. John's great-great-grandfather helped settle Elizabethtown, New Jersey, and was very active participant in the Revolutionary War, as was his other family members. The old First Presbyterian Church graveyard in Elizabeth, New Jersey, holds the remains of 126 of John Woodruff's ancestors. The first church was built in 1718 and served as a hospital during the Revolutionary War. The second church and present church was built in 1835. The churchyard itself was established in 1687, and the church was built in 1783. In 2019, renovation and cleanup started, and hundreds of unknown graves and other historical pieces were found that had not been previously documented. The work continues today. John Woodruff's parents were Samuel and Elizabeth Simpson Woodruff. The Woodruffs had 6 children. In the year that John was born in 1833, 3 of his siblings passed away the very week that John was born. The only explanation, of course, we can't find death records or anything like that to conclude what the death was. But upon researching the timeline of that area, I think we can come to the conclusion that the cholera pandemic of 1832 in the New York and the New Jersey area was probably the cause. By 1832, the pandemic had reached New York and the surrounding areas. An estimated between 16 and 18,000 Americans died in 1832 in the New York and New Jersey areas. This epidemic turned pandemic and lasted actually for several decades, and there were 3 major waves of infection. Although no death records were found, I think maybe we can come to the conclusion that this is probably the cause of the death of John's siblings. The map that you see here, geography and geology comes into play in the life of Mr. Woodruff. Land formations, Pennsylvania and in the New Jersey area, and it's the dark areas you see there is the New Jersey cave system, and of course it continues on up into southern New York and into Pennsylvania. I think maybe the environment in which Mr. Woodruff was accustomed to being raised may have something to do with his later on way of life. There are 142 caves in the New Jersey, the Morris County area, and still today, some of them are used as tourist attractions, hiking. It was also noted at one point where someone said that John was a civil engineer. Although I could not find any formal record of training or schooling, I did find him in the 1850 Essex, New Jersey census, living in a household headed by a contractor and several laborers named Kelly. He would have been 17 years old at the time. Whether this was a work crew or maybe it was an apprenticeship type of program, that's a mystery. And we jump to 1854. On November 17th, 1854, John married Dorothea Mack in Bergen, New Jersey, at the Reformed Dutch Church, the Old Bergen Church. Dorothea was of Scotch-Irish descent, and I could not find much information on her. She was born in 1824, which would have made her 9 years older than John. According to her obituary, she immigrated to America in 1845, and this is about the same time that the Irish potato famine was beginning. I could not find John and his family in the 1860 census at all. I was very unsuccessful with that. I'm not sure whether it was never out there published in an index or recorded publicly. There may have been I went through different name spellings, last name spellings, and came up 0. So maybe in the future, these research projects are never done. We go back and we look over and over again to see if there's any new information. military status. There was a question as to John's military status. It was said that he was a Confederate. Although that said, I did not find any military records or anything that would indicate that John was in the Confederacy. Whether that was rumor or one of the stories that had gotten started years ago, that's unknown. What I did find was a Civil War draft registration for the 15th New Jersey Infantry Regiment, which is Union, in Chatham, Morris, New Jersey, written up by Captain James M. Brown in 1863. He was on a Provost Marshal's Union Army list. That is the only document that I was able to find in the military records. So, and his relatives who visited here in 1989 also confirmed that they did not know his military status when they were asked. So we're going to jump to 1856. John and Dorothea had 3 children. There was Isabella and Henry and David. All the children were born in New York State. The lower graphic that you see is a land certificate of the Homestead Act of 1862. In 1866, a family would settle in Cambria, Kansas. In 1869, John and Dorothy purchased a 160-acre farm in Elm Creek, Kansas. And according to the non-population schedule, the agricultural schedule of 1870, their farm consisted of 1 horse, 2 milk cows, 9 other cattle, 100 acres of Indian corn, which 18 acres were improved and 132 acres not improved. It doesn't look like the farm was a very high income farm, very simple. In 1870, the federal and state census records, John and Dorothy are at the farm with their children. Henry works on the farm. Isabella, the daughter, she is a dressmaker. And David, the son, is home. David would go on to be the postmaster in Elm Creek later on. And they were joined on the farm with a helper, a laborer named Alfred Sweeney. In 1885, the family unit changes for the Woodruffs. John is still the head of the family of the household in the 1880 census, but in the 1885 census, the state census finds Dorothy the head of the household, and John has moved to Gypsum, Kansas, a nearby township, At that time, during 1885, Henry marries Ella Newman, but that marriage is very short-lived, and Ella marries 3 more times. Since there wasn't an 1890 census, it's unclear exactly when John came to the Dalles. We do know that in 1897, his son Henry contacted the Dalles postmaster inquiring of his whereabouts. So when we look at the Dalles Chronicle in 1896, we see John Woodruff's name on a dead letter file. They're looking for him in 1896. He's not picking up his mail. 1897, here is the mystery breaker. In the Dalles Mountaineer, on December 18th, 1897, a letter to the postmaster appears stating that the old hermit that lives in the cave above the Catholic cemetery, they are inquiring about his welfare. And there is a letter here from H.M. Woodruff, who was Henry Mack Woodruff. This is John's son. And the Woodruff referred in his letter is the hermit who managed to exist some way in the cave west of town. He described him as 5'5", gray, heavy beard and hair, blue eyes, short, thick hands, and a scar full length of his nose. He was a carpenter by trade, and he weighed about 135 pounds. So this is the first inquiry as to where John is. So let's jump forward a little bit. We talked about Henry Mack Woodruff, his son. Henry Mack Woodruff, or H.M. Woodruff, that was referred to in the Chronicle newspaper clip. Henry mined at the Silver Bow and the Lucky Chance mine near Sitka, Alaska. In 1898, Woodruff and 11 other men purchased an 11-ton steamboat in Bellingham, Washington. The steamboat, named Gertrude, apparently had left Sitka and came mainland, known why, perhaps looking for John, or business dealings for the mine. Henry made several trips back and forth to the mainland, so this may be, he may have come to the Dalles and looked for his father. Who knows? As the story goes, and there was a lot of historical writings written by Robert N. D'Armand. He was a prolific writer and journalist in the Juneau and the Sitka area. The Gertrude was beached, he said, by the Brady sawmill in a cove in Sitka and never was used again. So what these 11 gentlemen had in mind, one of them became quite famous, and we'll talk about him in just a second. He took a trip back to Boston, his hometown, and then came back to Alaska. On that boat was a man who would have a great influence on Henry, E.W. Merrill. Henry would become friends with Merrill and share a small house in Sitka from 1902 to 1908. And then they were joined by Robert D. Armand, the son of Robert D. Armand, who is our historian, Alaska historian. Henry would establish a tannery in the Stephen Chernoff house in the back of the Russian mission in Sitka. He was a juror for the Alaska District Court for 10 years. Apparently, they assign jurors for a long period of time instead of pulling names out of a hat every time. I would imagine that is because of travel restrictions during the year. He was a night watchman for the Sheldon Jackson School, and he worked on payroll at the Sitka Pioneer Home in 1913, where he would pass away in July 2nd, 1931. So we have Mr. Merrill at the Sitka National Park. Merrill was not only known as a photographer, but he was also for his dedication to the care and the trust of the first totem poles in the park. Merrill accompanied Governor John Brady during his expeditions to collect totem poles around Alaska. And once back in Sitka, was employed by Brady to oversee the repair and the repainting of the poles. I joined the Sitka Facebook page, and they are still repairing and painting the original poles, plus they are building new ones. You might want to go to the Facebook page. It's very, very interesting. They have two native Tlingit tribe people that still live there. Their families are very still very involved in carrying on tradition, and very, very interesting. Together, Brady and Merrill selected locations along the beachfront that would be the Indian River Park to install the totem poles. Merrill became the first unofficial custodian of the park, and totems after the Indian River Park was designated as Sitka National Monument in 1910. Merrill passed away in Sitka October 27th, 1929, of pneumonia, but he is known as Sitka's father of pictures. And if you go to the National Park Service site and go to the Sitka National Park, there is a link to Mr. Merrill's photography collection. Absolutely wonderful. And a story about the Tlingit tribe and Mr. Merrill's accomplishments. And Mr. Merrill must have been in high regard. There is a monument seal that is embedded in the rock there on the bay. And Henry, I did manage to find Henry's will and estate records. He was a simple man. He apparently his gold fever did not really turn up too much wealth for him. The heirs to Henry Woodruff's estate is who you see right here, the McNulty family. And Mr. McNulty, Joseph and Olga McNulty, they owned a small home next door to Henry. And Henry was gracious enough to will the McNulty family his small house and 15 cords of wood. And the rest of the estate went to the Pioneer Home there in Sitka, where Henry passed away, and to pay for his burial. So we go back to John. John, he became quite a recluse in his last years. Actually, he wasn't, when you think about it, he wasn't in the Dalles all that long. He wasn't fond of doctors, he said. He wasn't fond of ministers. He died in the Dalles Sanitarium on October 24th of 1908 of liver cancer. He's buried in a unmarked grave in the Potter's Field at the IOF cemetery because of the fire of 1914 at the IOF building downtown in the Dalles. The records, burial records, and the maps were destroyed in that fire, so there's really no way to tell where exactly John is buried. This is a obituary of his wife Dorothy. She died the same year, 1908, and Dorothy's obituary stated that she had been born in Ireland of Scottish parents, came to America at the age of 22 years old. Her and John were married in New York, and her husband had went to the Pacific coast and died there. So she did leave the David, her son, and Isabella, her daughter, and they never married. They both passed away too in 1931. And so there is the story. I did send for John's death certificate from the Oregon State Archives. This is his certificate stating that he died of liver cancer and at the Dalles Sanitarium. So hopefully we have a little bit different outlook or profile on Mr. Woodruff. It was interesting researching him. I did have some brick walls researching. I did this during the pandemic, right at the height of the lockdown, and so 3 of the institutions that I was trying to contact didn't have anybody there. So, or the ones that I did get a hold of said that there was no information. So this is the conclusion today of John Woodruff, and I hope everyone has learned something new.
So time for questions and answers. Questions?
My question, yeah, this is Carolyn. My question is there anything of like of the structure still up at the Hermit's Cave?
The what?
Is there any, like the door or any of that front wall or any, is there anything inside?
I don't know. I don't know the you know, how he built it or how he obtained, you know, his supplies. I would imagine from talking to residences now and their grandfathers and grandmothers knowing him, I would probably say they helped him out a lot. I know the Fleck family, the Moore family, Linda Pichon's family was one of the ones that she knew of their connection to him. So I would imagine that's where he got his supplies. And I'm not sure if he, someone said that they thought that he had been supported by family members. And according to what is written here, he made really no contact with any of them. And that kind of shows
Right.
there.
Well, I'm going to ask my kids because they have told me in later years, oh yes, Mom, we used to go up to the Hermit's Cave. And I never gave it too much thought, but I know I'm going to ask them now what they saw. If they saw anything, you know, this would have been in the 70s.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, I'm assuming there's probably nothing left, but I'm curious.
Well, I used to ride horseback up there on the hill. There was a horse path from Chenoweth Middle School all the way down to Eleanor Borg's dance studio, and we'd ride that 2 or 3 or 4 times a week. But I never went farther than that, and we never went up to the cave or went near it. But a lot of people did. So.
Well, they never told me at the time. It was at several years later, and I said, "Oh, I never did." You know, the kids used to go out and wander, I guess, more than I thought.
Uh-huh. Well, you know, he wasn't here. He was here from what, 1894 or 5 to 1908. That's not very long.
Right.
It's a very short time.
Yeah. Hmm. Well, they must have had a source for books.
Yeah, there are some answers in the chat. No structure remaining. Somebody says, my father took me there in the 1990s. No structure, just the rock overhang. Somebody says, I was there 3 years ago. No wooden structure still there.
Okay.
Then there's a interesting one. I've heard that there was a rumor that he had money hidden in the cave, that after he died, they looted the cave and perhaps blew up a part of it. The overhang in front looked like a big rock in front of the cave.
Uh-huh.
Do you know anything about that, Georgia?
Well, there wasn't any, I couldn't find any newspaper articles on blowing the cave up or anything like that, or whether, you know, I couldn't find, unless there's something out there that I didn't see. But I think maybe, you know, there were people that thought that John was kind of mentally not stable because he lived in a cave, and they had asked him to be examined by physicians, and he was several times, and the doctor said he's just fine, that there is nothing wrong. But you know, there's always a portion of society in every era that has that way of thinking. So, but I from what I have gathered, you know, from families that were involved with him years ago, he was a pretty stable guy, and for whatever reason, he decided not to talk about his family and to be a recluse. And I think maybe we should respect him for that.
If he had a big scar on his nose, he also may have been into some kind of altercation that made him want to leave that part of the country.
Well, you know, he had carpenter skills, fairly good carpenter skills, it looks like. There was a comment of him building bridges during the Civil War, and this is where the Confederate military status came in to talk. Said that he had built bridges for the Confederate Army, and there is no military proof that that's what happened. He could have been a civilian worker for the Confederate Army as well. Who knows? But there's no exact proof of that.
Okay.
He had a cousin that came to Oregon in 1989, Richard Woodruff, that was interviewed by Elroy King. And I think Elroy asked him a lot of these questions as well. And Richard Woodruff said no, that he didn't know of any military connection that John had, and that they had found out about John through a old newspaper that had been passed down through the family, and decided to do a genealogy vacation and come to the Dalles to get some more information. Richard and his wife has since passed on. They lived in California, and so that event occurred as well.
Just the fact that he lived in a cave was an oddity to people here, and they thought he'd have to be crazy to do
I
that.
know. Well, I think a lot of it's too. I mean, back on the East Coast, it's not uncommon, for there's caves, back there,
Well,
Pennsylvania, mining Pennsylvania, and the geological and archaeological structure of the East Coast is a lot different from the West. Sure, we
Well-
have caves, but probably something a little bit more different than what we've got
Right.
out here.
Well, I was just thinking, if you were an immigrant, or just even the earliest people who came to the West Coast, if they found a cave, I'm sure they were going to use it if it was possible, instead of trying to start to be building.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it was the logical thing to do to begin with. So,
Uh-huh. Well, it was said that he even made the cave bigger, and scooped it out even more to make more room for a living area. So he was very he'd done construction. He had learned carpentry, and to build that, he had to know a little bit of engineering as well.
sure.
This is Katie. I have a question. Did he own the property, or did he just move in?
Well, that's a question that I never got answered either. I believe that the Fleck family may have owned that property, and I'm not sure. I got a little message on chat here about a Fleck member that's in the audience today. Yeah, are they here? A Fleck family member? No?
Oh, it's
Well, I will ask.
okay. The Fleck family did own it.
They own the
That's-
property?
Okay, that's just what one says here from Jim Moore.
Oh. Jim, are you still on here? No?
Yes, he is.
Oh, maybe he should.
I'm
Yeah, unmute. Jim, do you know anything about the property at all from the Fleck family? No?
just a
Jim-
little.
Jim has written in the chat, the Fleck family did own the property. They were, our great grandpa let him live there. So that's
Okay.
Jim's answer.
Okay. Well, then we've got that answered. Is there any other questions?
Can you hear me?
Is there what?
Yes.
Are there any more pictures of the interior? Any more pictures that you've seen of him?
No, this is the only ones that I have. There's a few others on the outside pictures. The image that's behind me today, I don't know whether you can see it or not. Can you see this?
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Okay. This image is from the cave, up by the cave. This is the view that John had.
Well, that's worth living there.
Yep.
Where,
And
where
this
would
picture,
more, where would
this-
more pictures be?
this picture is from the Wasco County Pioneer Association's collection at the Discovery Center. There's other pictures of John and some other things on the photo archive at the Discovery Center website. So you might want to check that out.
Okay, great, thanks.
It was very informative, Georgia. I've enjoyed it.
Well, thank you, Georgia. If there are no other questions, we'll move on to our little closing here, and again remind you that we have one more program coming up. And yeah, next week, Lorena Trickey, Oregon's world champion cowgirl, folks from the Crown Point Country Historical Society will be making that presentation. Ready for our little close?
The original courthouse welcomes members. You can join by going to the courthouse website. Here's the home page. Click on Join Us. And it takes you right to the membership form. We hope you'll consider joining. Please make out checks to Original Courthouse Preservation Corporation. Thanks for attending today, and we'll see you next time.